the key thing is to not give up on those dreams. And that sounds incredibly cheesy, but it's true. It's so easy to give up. There are so many things that will be put in your way to prevent you from achieving that dream. Where you're being told this is no good, this isn't for you, you're not, even at school, you're not going to become a writer. I would just say, just keep writing, because you will find your voice.
Hello and welcome to the shorter version of episode 3 of Creative Careers, featuring Alan Smith, the author and founder of Weeping Bank. Now, the full episode is available on my channel. There is a link to it in this description, and I would of course encourage you to watch it if you have an interest in any of the main themes, whether that's aspiring to become a published author, the world of literature and writing, and that conflict, whether to pursue an academic career or, opt for real life experience, as indeed Alan did. If you have an interest in any of those things, please do watch it. It's a great episode. But if you only have a passing interest, then I've created this, let's call it the highlights package, which will obviously contain some of the main themes. If you haven't already done so, I really would encourage you to subscribe to my channel. You just need to click on the subscribe button below. That way, all of the content will be delivered for free without you having to go looking for it. And you'll get notifications every time I post a new video. And of course, please do like and share this content, particularly with people who you think would benefit from careers advice in general, or looking for guidance. Now, Alan Smith is a published author and founder of Weeping Bank, a fictional village in which an unnamed librarian reads ghostly tales. What started out merely as a location in a short story, Weeping Bank has grown into a vehicle for live performances in which Alan himself delivers his tales as the librarian. I visited him to talk about his career, how he came to be a writer, and what led him to such a creative and innovative idea.
I mean, for me, my moment really was that very final year at primary school. I had this wonderful teacher called Mrs. Allen, and she was the first person who allowed me time to write. So she'd absolutely recognised that this was the thing I wanted to do. And like I say, I wasn't brilliant at it by any means. My grammar wasn't great, punctuation wasn't great. Very often I'd hand these things in and they'd all come back with, in my day, it was all red pen markings and you'd lost points because you hadn't put it all structurally right. But she was the teacher that recognised that there was something in the writing that was worth pursuing. So she gave me tons of encouragement in that final year and lots of little opportunities to do this writing. So when I left primary school and started in secondary school, the last thing I did before I left was I wrote a completely fictional story about an adventure weekend that we'd had in our final year, and I left it at the school for her to read, not thinking I'd ever hear anything more about it. And when I started at secondary school, through a friend of mine who lived close to the school, the book was returned to me, and in the back of it she'd written this lovely little message that basically said, "Don't give up on this writing. You never know where it'll lead you." And that's something that I've treasured for the rest of my life, really. And so at secondary school, I was looking wherever possible to do more and more stuff to do with English. I think I reached a point where I accepted that you can't change the system. As much as you'd love to say to the teachers, "I don't want to read this, I don't want to do this particular essay," you can't do that. And actually the reasoning behind it is very sound. They're trying to help you to explore various different styles and different things. And actually it's a really good thing for a writer to read as much as possible, but also in your own mind to make some choices yourself and think, these are not necessarily the writers that are sparking that thing for me. I knew the books that I preferred, and we did dip in very, very briefly towards the end of secondary school into more of a gothic writing, and I think we did Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And I can remember being familiar with that story, but in the wrong way. I was familiar with it because of the films, and the more you learn about that story, actually the films are far more remembered than the book is, because they have added so much more to the story than is in there. But I do remember enjoying that book and that style and the setting and the whole idea of kind of a Victorian London, and that was definitely probably one of the first books that made me think, there must be more stories like this.
Following university, Alan took a break from the world of academia and took a series of practical jobs which allowed him not only to rediscover his love of reading and writing, but also to begin to capture his observations of the real-life characters around him who would eventually weave their way into his work.
So I really enjoyed that. I did some very practical work. I worked for some garden centres and some landscaping firms, and met some incredible people. All these different stories that you're hearing. And as a writer, you don't realise what you're absorbing all the time. Not just somebody's stories that they're telling you, but their mannerisms and different parts of their personality that you think, I really like that. I like the way they say that particular phrase, or or even just what they're wearing. It becomes like, I could see a character wearing something like this, or they might have a nickname or something, and you think, I could play around with that. And at this time I was sharing a flat with a friend, and he would often be gone of an evening because he used to work at night. And I didn't have my own computer. He had a computer, and he would say to me, look, you can use it, if you're working on an essay or whatever, you can use my computer while I'm not here. And there was a particular night where I was sitting at his computer. We were in a block of flats, and I've got this sort of view out of the window of an old abandoned warehouse and an alleyway that sort of wend its way up towards a dilapidated church, which you could sort of see from here. And I was staring at a blank piece of paper, and I thought, I'm going to write something to do with that landscape and where I am in this block of flats. And I wrote about 10 pages of this story, no idea of what it was, where it was going. And my friend came back from work, and the next day I handed him these sort of 10 pieces of A4 and asked him to read it, which he did, incredibly. Sat there, read it with a cup of coffee. And at the end of it, he said, I really like that, Al. Where's that going? And I had absolutely no idea, like genuinely no idea. I just said, I was just so bored last night, didn't want to do the essay, started to write this story. And without realising it, I'd begun a novel that I had not planned, that I had no structure for, but I had thoroughly enjoyed creative writing again.
The book took Alan 3 years to complete, and even longer to submit to literary agents. Following some invaluable advice from one of his favourite authors, he was able to edit it down to 3 volumes and eventually secured a publishing deal. With his lifetime ambition of becoming a published author fulfilled, he took a slightly different route to following up with his next work.
I was on a walk, not far from where I live now, because that's always been a thing for me. If I'm stuck on a story, I go off for a nice walk somewhere, and very often either the plot will start to come together, or you'll see something in the landscape, you think, I can use that. And on this particular walk, there was this beautiful tree, huge weeping willow tree. And it wasn't by water, but the road that it's on floods quite a lot. So at the day that I was walking up there was kind of this free-flowing stream almost coming down past it. And I remember looking at this tree thinking, that's incredible, what a beautiful tree. Weeping, this word was in my head. And the further I went on the walk, the more I thought about the tree and that word. And all of a sudden, the idea of having a place where there would be, this beautiful tree growing by some water, this little village maybe. And then I like the idea of a library. Perhaps you could have a library. And then you start to throw other words around that might go with the weeping. It could be called weeping something. Weeping close, weeping road, weeping town. And suddenly this word, weeping bank. And the idea that it couldn't all just be within this little village. There would have to be places just down the road from it where other stories could happen. So I invented a town called Merrington, a town called Rayford, and I thought, yes, some of these characters, will be in all these different areas. And then I started to play around with the idea that maybe sometimes we will revisit places, because as a reader you might really like that. So if you particularly enjoyed the time that you spent in the antique shop, well, we'll make sure the antique shop comes into another story at another point.
The more condensed nature of these new short stories, together with the ghostly theme, gave Alan the chance to read his first few Weeping Bank stories to friends and family members, and then, through his various contacts, managed to secure a reading in a local library.
And I was getting some really nice feedback from people saying, I really enjoyed that. I haven't been read to since I was a little girl or a little boy, and I've really forgotten what it's like to have somebody come and tell you a story. And so as a result of that, I got another couple of bookings to do these sort of very short little readings. But each time you do one, your confidence changes and you start to put a little bit more into the way it's being read. And then you start to think about, well, what can I do to make this more interesting for people that come? So I started to think about actually doing the reading as the librarian, which had never occurred to me before, but I thought, if I came dressed a certain way, then people will accept that I'm that character. I'm not theatrical, I'm not going to have learnt it, so it's still going to be a reading, but at least if you look the part and you sit in the right sort of chair, then people will piece it all together in their mind that they're with you, they're in your study or wherever you are, and they're listening to you read. And that was the birth of the librarian on stage. Like that lucky moment happened. So we promised a reading at just before Christmas last year that was going to be online, and we filmed this particular story, and we screened it on the 22nd of December, and there were people attending that screening who we couldn't possibly have known had bought a ticket for it. And some of those people, ironically, were attached to the BBC Ghost Stories for Christmas, which, to me, that's still unbelievable now, that would sort of come full circle. And because of that, and because of how that reading went down, they began talking about it online, and all of a sudden it opened more doors to more bookings for Weeping Bank. And now this year we're already looking at quite a heavy schedule of readings that will happen sort of towards late summer, right the way through the winter into the early part of next year, and that could continue to grow. So suddenly, from what was the idea of writing a story to give myself a break from having to write a big long novel, has pretty much become what we do day in, day out.
I was fortunate to be able to attend one of Weeping Bank's live readings, where I was able to capture some of Alan's thoughts prior to going on stage.
I don't find that I sort of relax into enjoying the reading until probably the second or third page of the story. By that point, you found your pace. Initially, you always start too quickly, and again, you're not fully aware of the projection of your voice. Is it loud enough? Can everybody hear it at the back? So you've got all kinds of thoughts going on whilst you're reading that first page and a bit, really, and then all of a sudden you're doing it, and you're no longer thinking about the audience, you're no longer thinking about this setup, you're straight into the story then.
Whenever I'm in town, I always pay a visit to Van Jarrett and Son, a veritable cornucopia of antiques and trinkets, acquired with not inconsiderable skill by the rather gregarious proprietor. Mr. Van Jarrett would never claim to be an antiques expert, and he can often be heard to feign ignorance when a would-be seller presents him with a particularly valuable item. But those of us who have known him for a long time are well aware of his exceptional eye for a bargain.
Perhaps the final word of encouragement to any aspiring writer should go to Alan himself.
Key thing is to not give up on those dreams, and that sounds incredibly cheesy, but it's true. It's so easy to give up. There are so many things that will be put in your way to prevent you from achieving that dream. But what was in my head was this idea that I wanted to write, and I hung on to that. Throughout everything that's happened all over the years, I hung on to that idea that was the one thing I felt was what I was supposed to be doing. And I think if you've got something in your head, that you feel is you. It may not have a definite path. You might not be able to go to your careers advisor, or you might not be able to turn to your friends or your parents or your teachers and say, this is what I want to do, how do I go about doing it? There may not be that definite structure to do it, but that doesn't mean it won't happen for you. It just means that you've maybe got to hang on that bit tighter than everybody else who's got a definite path, and they can clearly do X, Y, Z, and they'll achieve this. Yours may be a route that's more like this, but if you hang on and you just let it take you, it will find its way, definitely.